So, LIV Golf have just announced that Greg Norman is being moved upstairs. Some would say, sacked. In this podcast, we're going to discuss what that could possibly mean for bringing professional golf back together. And also, my theory on this could actually mean that Rory McIlroy is going to sign for LIV Golf. So, as mentioned in the intro there, LIV Golf has announced that Greg Norman is being moved out of his position as the CEO of LIV Golf. So for those of you who may be a bit younger than my much older years, there's a bit of history between Greg Norman and the PGA Tour. So way back in the 90s, Greg Norman came up with an idea for a world tour. He thought that the professional game of golf should have been taken around the world. And back then, a lot of the top players did go around the world. They did play the likes of your Seve Ballesterises, Greg Norman himself, Sandy Lyle, Ian Woosnam, Bernard Langer. You know, I'm mentioning a lot of international players there because it tended to be the international players. Some of the American players did as well, especially if they were being offered a big appearance fee to go and play. And they would go and play in the Australian Open, the Australian Masters. They would come to the UK to play in the really big European Tour events that used to be held in the UK back in the day. But Greg Norman thought that actually too much of the golf was being played in America and the PGA Tour had too much control, and he came up with the idea for a new world tour, which actually wasn't too far off what LIV Golf has ended up being, although it was more traditional with 72 holes and a cut and what have you. But what that has meant is that, you know, basically that never happened. Greg Norman was pretty much shot down in flames by the real sort of strong American golfers at the time. So your Arnold Palmers, your Jack Nicklaus's, your Tom Watsons, they all made it pretty clear that they were going to have no part in this and they were going to stay and support the PGA Tour and play largely in America. And what this meant was that it left Greg Norman was put in a position where he looked quite weak in many ways, that he had managed to get this through. It was a big sort of slap in the chops for him, and it led to him having a long time grudge with the PGA Tour. And it is thought that actually that when he was put in charge of LIV Golf, that it was that grudge of his that really pushed LIV Golf along to where it is presently today. So what that has meant actually with trying to bring the world of professional golf back together is that Greg Norman is a very divisive figure and a bit of a sticking point in that actually happening. So what does this mean in the big picture of everything? Well, it's definitely, I think, a very positive thing in trying to get things to move forward in the negotiations between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf. I'm trying to, you know, obviously try and bring professional golf back together in some way. I have said many times, I've got no idea what this is going to look like. It is all going to come together at some point. It has to. This sort of two separate tours can't go on for much longer. You know, viewing figures are going through the floor on the PGA Tour side. LIV isn't really getting any TV figures whatsoever, although their events do seem to be getting some traction and getting more popular. But, you know, overall, it's been bad for professional golf and people tuning in to watch because they want to watch all the best players playing against each other all the time. The only people that seem to have done well out of this are the majors, where it was the only time that it came together. And those majors, for me, were just that little bit more interesting. They were that little bit more spicy because you had that LIV and PGA Tour dynamic going on. You know, when Brooks was going for the PGA and when Bryson was in there for the majors this year, it was inevitable that the PGA Tour players were going to win more of the majors because they've got, you know, I don't know what the numbers would be, but they would have, you know, 120 players in the field and LIV would have maybe 18 or 20 players maximum in the field. So the odds of a LIV golfer winning were always pretty long. But to be fair to them, they have won some of the majors in the last sort of couple of years. And, you know, if their players haven't won, they've been on the first page of the leaderboard and stuff like that as well. But, you know, overall, we need to get everyone back together. And I've got no idea what that's going to look like. You know, people are suggesting now that the PGA Tour season could run from the start of the season. So sort of like the LA Open at Riviera, where, you know, that's their big sort of signature event early in the year. And they could run through to the Open Championship, the British Open Championship. and then their season would stop, and then the LIV season would start from there and run into the autumn and the fall. That would mean then that players could play on both tours if they were invited, if they wanted to, because they wouldn't be clashing with each other. Whether that's what it's going to look like, I've no idea. But the removal of Greg Norman definitely is a positive thing in trying to get some kind of agreement between these two rival tours. As always, get in the comments and let me know whether you think that Greg Norman being removed from his position and pretty much out of the picture now is going to be the sort of deciding point in the whole of professional golf coming back together. But now on to my other theory of what this could possibly mean. This could actually mean that, you know, that we're still actually worlds apart from having a agreement, and an agreement might be at the very earliest possible for the start of the 2026 season, possibly the 2027 season, because these things are not easy to put together. You know, putting together new schedules and incorporating different players and different tours and dates and going around the world. This is all things that, you know, it's going to take a lot of time. So it could feasibly be sort of 2027 before this whole thing is put together and we know exactly how it's all going to look. So that means that we've got quite a bit of time where we're going to continue as we are. Now, Rory McIlroy was for a long time a massive critic of LIV Golf. You know, he famously said, "I hate LIV Golf, I just wish it would go away." And he was also very, very critical of Greg Norman. They had some very public spats in press conferences, not together obviously, but one would talk about each other in their separate press conferences, especially Rory about Greg. And on social media, this would happen. There was loads of news articles about how Rory's got no time for Greg Norman whatsoever, and you know he needs to be moved out of his position and all this kind of stuff. Well, that has now finally happened. So my question to you is, if LIV and the PGA Tour aren't going to actually come together till possibly 2027, does this mean, does Greg Norman being moved out of his CEO role actually open the door for Rory McIlroy to sign for LIV Golf and be given a LIV Golf team franchise? There has been some rumours in the past about Rory having a LIV Golf for a franchise, and that would be an Irish team with some kind of Irish name, and he'd probably bring Shane Lowry with him as well. You know, I could quite easily see that as something that would work. I always think that these LIV teams work better when it's more about a country. I think the Stingers are better because it's a South African team. I think the Rippers are better because they're an Australian team. I think it's a lot easier for fans to get behind teams that are of their country. It's not an easy thing to do, obviously, because you're not going to always have enough players from a nation. You know, Talk, GC, okay, they're not all from the same nation, but they're all South American. I think that dynamic works. So an Irish team with Rory and Shane Lowry at the figurehead of it, I could see that definitely working. Now, one thing that would never happen is Rory McIlroy signing for LIV Golf and posing, having a handshake with Greg Norman. There's no way in the world that would happen. So I've got no inside information. I've not heard anything. This is just purely a theory from me. So please get in the comments and think whether this theory could possibly have some legs, or you think that I'm just totally living in some kind of fantasy world here. But is it possible that Rory has been having talks with LIV Golf, because he has been saying quite a lot recently that we have to take professional golf around the world, we have to have a world tour, and from what I can see so far, there is no appetite on the PGA Tour side or a lot of the American players to want to do that. They want to just keep playing their golf in the United States of America, and I understand why that is. It's only what they've ever known. It's only what they've ever been brought up with, and all the best tournaments were in the United States, so I totally understand it. But is it a case where Rory's got to a point and thought, that's not going to happen? And if I'm going to stand true to my values of playing golf around the world, then I'm going to have to sign for LIV Golf. But if I'm going to sign for LIV Golf, then Greg Norman has got to be out of the equation, so I don't look like an even bigger hypocrite than I may look after all of the criticism that he's given it in the past. I don't know It just occurred to me that when I saw that Greg Norman was being moved out of his position, that this could be something that's been going on, some negotiations behind the scenes with Rory recently, and he's about to accept an unbelievably massive amount of money. If Jon Rahm went for the sort of money that's been rumoured, around somewhere between $400 and $500 million, I think that Rory McIlroy could possibly move to LIV Golf for somewhere near $1 billion. I know that is just an outrageous amount of money, but it is possible. But I honestly don't think that Rory McIlroy would even sign for $1 billion if he had to stand for a photograph and have his hand shaken with Greg Norman. So I'm just saying that just possibly Greg Norman being moved out of the way might be one of the final pieces that allows Rory to move to LIV Golf, get his own Irish team, bring Shane Lowry with him, maybe bring Seamus Power with him, put an Irish team together, and then he will be a LIV golfer for the start of next season. What do you think? Get in the comments. Let me know what you think. Okay, that's it for this week's podcast. I have got another podcast coming in 2 days, and it's so random. It's so weird. It is whether Tesla Optimus robots are going to be playing an active part in our golf clubs in the very near future. It's a bit of a weird one, that, but please look out for that one. That's probably going to land on Saturday night, I think. Okay, so that's it for this podcast. I look forward to reading your comments, and I'll see you in the next podcast.